Let's talk Bosnian Beast. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another player review. This is the second to last player review. The last one will come tomorrow, and that'll be Damian Lillard's. Can't believe I'm pretty much already done with this series. This is going to be the last video with graphics. I'll talk about why I'm not doing graphics for Dame's video in Dame's video, but this is the last video for graphics, so hopefully you've enjoyed all the graphics that I've done for this stuff. You guys know I try and go above and beyond. Anyway, hit that subscribe button down below. Leave a like on this video. It helps me out, and I'm not going to waste any more of your time with an intro. Let's start talking about Jusuf Nurkic. I did a player preview video on him. Here's what I said in that video. So let's just look at different aspects of his offensive game. And I'm going to get the most controversial aspect of his offense out of the way first. That is his finishing ability or lack thereof. Now, Nurkic definitely has some finishing issues. He's had this throughout his career. And he's shown flashes of being able to finish well enough to be a legitimate threat. I think the month or so before he ended up going down with that broken leg against the Brooklyn Nets in March of 2019, he was finishing the ball really well. He was playing phenomenal basketball, and in that game in which he went down with that injury, he had, I think, 32 points once that injury happened. Now, that was a double overtime game, so that definitely helped him pad his scoring numbers, but that game he was finishing extremely well, and he's shown some flashes of it. However, since coming back from that injury, he hasn't been a super consistent finisher. However, I don't think he's as bad of a finisher as people act like he is. He shot 52.5% from 2 the past couple of seasons. That's not good. It's definitely below average, but it's not terrible, and I am hopeful that he will be able to figure some things out and maybe have better finishing opportunities this season and be able to be more efficient on the interior. Now, outside of that, I really like Nurkic's passing. His best passing moments come when he's hitting backdoor cutters, so I'm hoping that we have more of those in our offense this season. However, beyond that, I like him as a short roll playmaker. That's where him just kind of slowing down and reading the game is a good thing, because if players are stepping up on the short roll, then he's able to make the right pass. A lot of teams trap Dame, play 2 defenders high on Dame, and then rotate a 3rd defender to Jusuf Nurkic. So that's leaving somebody somewhere else open once Nurkic is catching the ball, and he's shown that he can be a bit of a short roll playmaker, so I'm expecting to see more of that this season. As far as his 3-point percentage goes, it's going to be interesting to see what that looks like. I have a goal for him that I'll state later, but as I said, last year 12 for 30, 40% from 3, and he's been shooting 3s this preseason, so it'll be interesting to see how many 3s per game he shoots. At this point, I would let him shoot a couple 3s a game. If he's wide open, I would let him shoot. Now, as far as his defensive game goes, I think he's going to be better playing up at the screen. I think he has the mobility to do it. He has to be smart in terms of not fouling, but I think that'll come as he gets more used to playing up at the screen. We've seen him force some turnovers in the past when he went rogue, according to stats, and played up on screens, so it's going to be interesting to watch him do it on a larger sample size. Beyond that, I still like his rim protection. People act like he's not a good rim protector anymore, and I just don't see it. He's still a good rim protector, and he's not a guy who's bad if he's switched out on most forwards. And even guards, I think he can compete against when switched out there. Now, let's see if he achieved what I wanted from him by jumping into the stats. First, let's take a look at some of the statistical goals that I set for him in that video. I wanted him to play 29 minutes per game, and in those 29 minutes per game, I wanted him to get 17 points, 11 rebounds, 4.5 assists, shoot 54% from 2, 35% from 3, and get less than 3.5 fouls per game. Now let's look at his actual stat line. He played an almost identical amount of minutes per game, so it should be really easy to see if he achieved his goals. He played 28.2 minutes per game, averaged 15 points, 11.1 rebounds, 2.8 assists, shot 56.3% from 2, 26.8% from 3, and averaged 3.4 fouls per game. So let's look at the difference between his goals and what he actually put up for the season. He was a couple points per game short of his 17-point per game goal. That was a bit of an ambitious goal. He did achieve his rebounding goal, though, by about a tenth of a rebound. He was 1.7 assists per game short. I did set an optimistic 4.5 assists per game goal for him, but I thought going into the season, Chauncey was going to utilize his playmaking more, and it took a while for that to manifest itself. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. He did achieve his 2-point percentage goal, though, by 2.3 percentage points, as he shot 56.3%. His 3-point percentage goal didn't come close to achieving that, struggled to shoot the ball on the season. And his fouls per game goal, he actually achieved barely by a tenth of a foul per game. Now let's look at the positives for Mr. Nurkic. The first positive was his finishing, and it drove me crazy all season long where people were freaking out every time Jusuf Nurkic missed a lay-in, because as we said all season long, he was actually finishing at by far the best rate in his career. His 56.32 point percentage was a career high. His next closest year was when he shot 52.5% the previous 2 seasons, and that included Nurkic shooting 65% from 0 to 3 feet. That was about 5 percentage points higher than his career average from there. He also shot a career high 48% from 3 to 10 feet. His career average from there was 40.5%. So Nurkic finished well all season long, and that was with him playing next to a not fully healthy Damian Lillard, and he played a lot of minutes without Damian Lillard, and Damian Lillard has always been his best teammate in terms of setting him up for easy finishes. Yes, he'll get a little bit too finesse at times and throw up some shots that you wish he wouldn't shoot. There's obviously still some room for improvement in certain situations, but I think Nurkic has improved, and you have to give him credit for it. This was definitely a career year for him finishing the basketball. The second positive was his pick and roll defense. I thought he actually played Chauncey Billups' aggressive pick and roll scheme pretty dang well. There was a lot of breakdowns on the backside behind that created issues, and that's why you didn't see much improvement with this defense this year. But I've always thought Nurkic got a little bit too much criticism for being slow-footed, because I don't think he's slow-footed. You see a guy like Nurkic who's kind of heavy-set, built like he is, and I feel like a lot of people, just because of that aesthetic, just assume or trick themselves into thinking he's not as fleet-footed as he is. I'm not saying he's a quick big man. I'm not saying he's super mobile, but he's quick enough in order to run an aggressive pick-and-roll scheme correctly. And there were numerous times this year where Jusuf Nurkic would hedge on a ball handler or trap a ball handler properly. If he hedged, he'd recover back to his guy. Now, as I said, there were issues behind that, and there was issues with the guard getting through the screen and not letting the ball handler turn downhill. There was a lot of issues with the pick and roll defense that weren't Nurkic's fault, that seemingly got blamed on Nurkic. I actually thought he was the best pick and roll defender on the Blazers this season, and he just needs teammates that know what they're doing behind that, and he needs teammates that are bought in. The third positive is his rebounding. This season, he set a career high in rebounding at 11 per game in only 28 minutes. That's very impressive. Per 36, he averaged 14 rebounds per game. So Jusuf Nurkic was a phenomenal rebounder. If Jeremy Grant is truly going to become a Portland Trailblazer, it's good to have a center like Jusuf Nurkic who can rebound the ball like he does. And then the fourth positive was Nurkic's play in January and February. Nurkic got off to a slow start this year, wasn't utilized how Chauncey Billups said he was going to utilize him, at least at the start of the year. And then when we got into January and February, you started to see a better version of Jusuf Nurkic. In 16 games in January, Nurkic averaged 17.3 points per game and 12.2 rebounds per game and a little over 3 assists. And then in February, he struggled to finish. He was 5 for 10 from 3, so started knocking down some threes, but in 8 games in February, he did average almost 18 points per game. He averaged over 13 rebounds per game and averaged 3.8 assists per game. So you finally started to see some of the production that I expected of Jusuf Nurkic heading into the season, and it resulted in the Blazers being a competitive team when people thought they weren't going to be, with a lineup that consisted of Anthony Simons, Josh Hart, Justice Winslow, and Jusuf Nurkic. I'm hopeful that his play in January and February can be a little bit of a stepping stone into him getting off to a faster start next season. Now let's take a look at some negatives. The first negative has to be his three-point shooting. Nurkic worked on his three-point shooting the offseason before this year, and there was some hope that he would be able to develop into a stretch big man. He did shoot more threes than he ever has, shooting 1 a game, but it did not result in any sort of production, only shooting 27%. On his career, he's a 23% three-point shooter. Now, as I said, he ended the year well, shooting 5 for 10, small sample size. Don't know how much stock to put in that. The bigger sample size is he was 15 for 56 on the season, which is not good. I think his form is okay. His shooting elbow is out a little bit, and he has a tendency to kind of throw the ball forward a little bit too much, kind of push the ball forward. I think he needs to try and get a little bit more arc at times from three. Some of that could just be him being tired and having to compensate, and I still think there's a chance, given the fact that he's still only 27 years old. It seems like he's been around forever. I still think there's a chance that he can develop into an adequate three-point shooter, which would be huge for this team because then he would be somebody that can space the floor. Right now, with him shooting only 27% on the season, he's not a guy that defenses have to respect, so that's definitely a negative. The second negative was his rim protection, which wasn't as good as it was in prior years. You can see that reflected in his block numbers, and I'm not sure if this is due to the injury he had back in 2019 or what. His rim protection was probably in the best spot it was in 2019. The Blazers were playing some really good basketball, and that was of course the year that they made the Western Conference Finals, but he did come back in 8 regular season games in the bubble. He averaged 2 blocks per game. His rim protection was very solid. In 2020/2021, he averaged 1.1 blocks per game, and then this past season he only averaged 0.6 blocks per game. Now you can't just gauge rim protection based on block per game numbers, and some of the decline in block per game numbers can be explained by him playing up at the point of the screen more, but it just seemed like Nurkic lacked that little bit of spring he needed in his step, in his jump, in order to block some shots that in the past he normally would have blocked. And it wasn't due to Nurkic being out of shape. He was probably in the best shape of his career coming into this year, and I still don't think it's at the point where his rim protection is a negative. This is, of course, just based on the standard that he had set in prior years. I still think he's a solid enough rim protector, but in prior years he was sneakily potentially a top 10 rim protector in the league depending on how you looked at things, and I don't think he was quite to that level last season. The third negative was his passing and his turnovers. I set a goal of a 1.5 to 1 assist to turnover ratio for him this season, and he didn't achieve that. He averaged 2.8 assists per game and 2.6 turnovers per game. Now, a lot of those turnovers could be explained by offensive fouls, moving screens. It seemed like he set more of those than he ever has this past season. But according to Basketball Reference, he had 55 bad passes on the season in his 56 games. That's about the same rate that he had last season and a little bit higher of a rate than he had in 2017 through 2019. However, he wasn't being utilized more as a passer. If anything, he was being utilized a little bit less. Therefore, I have to list it as a negative. Part of the turnovers conversation comes back to he needs to be better at setting screens without moving. When he doesn't get called for fouls, he's great at setting screens, but sometimes he tries a little bit too hard to set a perfect screen, and he gets whistled for a turnover because of it. It also could potentially get him in foul trouble as well, so he needs to cut down on those. But in terms of his passing, I think a big part of it was a utilization issue. There was times where he would force passes that just obviously weren't there, but part of my belief is that he wasn't happy with his utilization as a passer and would try and either prove a point or just make something happen because he didn't get the opportunity as much as he felt he should, and therefore he tried to force some things that weren't there that he might not have tried to force in the past. Now, this is just my wild speculation, and if that is the case, then Nurkic needs to try and keep his head about him and just make the right play for the team. But I would like to see Nurkic utilized a little bit more as a passer next season with Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons playing off of him. The fourth negative was his consistency. It seems like Nurkic would have a good game, then kind of disappear for a stretch the following game, and he was up and down all season long. That's kind of the way this team was at the start of the season. You'd see a great team one game that would blow out Phoenix, blow out Memphis, and then you'd see a team that'd go on the road and couldn't beat anyone except for Houston in the first month of the season. Nurkic was definitely definitely a part of that with his inconsistency, and some of this goes back to him just kind of mentally checking out when things weren't going his way. It's definitely something for him to try and improve on next season. Anyway, as far as his future, Jusuf Nurkic is an unrestricted free agent this offseason, but I fully expect him to be back with the Portland Trail Blazers next season. A lot of people have tossed out potential center upgrades to go after, but none of them are super realistic. The Blazers don't really have the salary to match Rudy Gobert, and if you go out and get Rudy Gobert, you're going to have to trade Bledsoe, and you're going to have to trade Josh Hart, and then Jusuf Nurkic is probably going to walk and be a starting center somewhere else. So you have to factor in losing Jusuf Nurkic as part of the opportunity cost for getting a guy like a Rudy Gobert or a DeAndre Ayton. And then when you count what you'd have to give up for Rudy Gobert, probably Portland's own first-round pick this year with Josh Hart, it's just too steep of a price, and it doesn't fix either of the forward positions. As far as DeAndre Ayton goes, he's a restricted free agent. I fully expect Phoenix to match whatever offer they get on him, but in order for Portland to provide an offer, they'd have to let certain players walk and maneuver the cap around to be able to clear the space, and they'd have to do that before signing DeAndre Ayton to an offer sheet, and then Phoenix could still sign, and Portland just lost some guys for nothing. So it doesn't make sense to go after these center upgrades that people will pitch out there. So I fully expect Portland to go hard after Jusuf Nurkic and re-sign him. I think Nurkic probably already knows if he's coming back next year or not, and it sounds like he's probably going to come back. He wants to play with Dame. He'll be able to play with Ant. I think the last month and a half of the season kind of got Nurkic bought back in after him seemingly being a little bit disenfranchised to start the season. What his contract will be, I don't know, but Portland is in a position where they could offer him $15 million a year for the next couple years and be just fine, unless they take on a bunch of salary in the offseason in some sort of way. So I expect Jusuf Nurkic to come back on a 2 to 3 year deal between $10 to $15 million this offseason. And then once free agency is over, and if he's back on the Portland Trail Blazers, it's pretty obvious what his role will be. It'll be what his role has always been for the Portland Trail Blazers. He'll be the starting center playing probably 27 to 30 minutes a game. As far as things I want Nurkic to work on this offseason, I want him to work on his three-point shot, because if he can truly become a floor spacer, that just makes the Portland Trail Blazers that much harder to guard. I know he worked on it a lot this past offseason and didn't get the best results, but I think he's close enough where there's still a chance where he could be a solid enough three-point shooter. Maybe he needs to tweak a couple form things, find the right shooting coach, and let him kind of maybe suggest little tweaks to Nurkic's jump shot to find some more consistency, because that's really what it is. He'll have stretches where he looks comfortable behind the three-point arc, and he'll have stretches where he just can't make a three. So it's just finding that consistency where he's able to knock down threes at a high enough rate to be a true threat. The other main thing I think he should work on is just seeing if he can become a little bit more athletic, working on his foot speed a little bit. That'll help him stay in shape and be conditioned coming into the season next year. And athleticism isn't an easy thing to work on, but there are things you can try and do for it. So if I was him, I would be trying to do those things and trying to become a little bit more athletic as a big man. He's never going to be a great athlete or a freak athlete or anything, but if he can get back a little bit of that spring he had in his step the past couple years, that would be definitely a big deal for him as a defender. Now, let's grade Nurkic's 2022 season. I have to give him a B-. He achieved some goals. His rebounding, he kept his fouls per game a little bit lower than I expected. He had a career year finishing the ball. I think his pick and roll defense was fine. There were some very clear positives and clear negatives from his season, so I think that grades out to a B-. Anyway, that wraps up this player review. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you've missed any player reviews, there is a playlist link down in the description box below, so go check that out. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit the like button to help me out, and I'm out here. I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers!